One of the most intellectually honest questions a person can ask about life after death is this: where exactly would a soul go? Not in the sense of heaven or hell as theological destinations, but spatially. If consciousness persists after death, and if the soul sojourns in other realms between lives, what kind of space are we talking about? This video takes that question seriously, not by appealing to faith, but by looking at what modern physics actually says about the possibility of dimensions beyond the three that we ordinarily inhabit as human beings on planet Earth, and what that has to do with the Cayce Readings description of the borderland, the soul's flight, and the inter-between experience. The Cayce readings are explicit that the universe contains many dimensions beyond the three of ordinary waking experience. Souls are multidimensional entities capable of passing between these realms. Death in one dimension is simply a transition to the next. What the readings call the borderland or inter-between is a transitional space, something like a staging area between earthly incarnations. It is not described as a purely symbolic space, nor is there a physical body involved, yet it is described as a genuine environment in which the soul exists, processes its experience, and prepares for what comes next. The readings also describe the soul's flight from a planetary sphere at approximately the time of physical birth, soul birth, as distinct from physical birth. This is not metaphorical language. The readings make precise distinctions. Sometimes soul birth precedes physical birth by hours, sometimes it follows. The soul arrives from somewhere. P.D. Ouspensky was a Russian mathematician and philosopher in the early 20th century who became fascinated by paranormal experience and the question of higher consciousness. The Cayce readings explicitly recommended his book Tertium Organum to seekers studying metaphysics. Ouspensky's central insight was that anomalous experiences, what we call psychic or mystical phenomena, point toward a space with more dimensions than our ordinary experience. He wrote, "We begin to conceive of the idea of a higher space possessing more dimensions than ours." What Ouspensky lacked was a physical framework for connecting higher dimensional space to the specific question of what happens to consciousness between lives. The readings had the destination. Ouspensky had the beginning of the map. What was missing was a physicist willing to draw it. Bernard Carr is a professor of mathematics and astronomy at Queen Mary University of London and a former president of the Society for Psychical Research. He is not a fringe figure, and his proposal is serious. These extra dimensions are amalgamated into what he calls a universal structure, a higher dimensional psychophysical information space. In this model, mind and matter are not separate substances interacting mysteriously. They are different aspects of the same higher dimensional reality, manifesting at different levels. And then Carr addresses the question directly that most physicists will not touch: survival after death. If reincarnation occurs, the soul is presumably located somewhere between incarnations. He calls it survival space, the domain within higher dimensional structure where consciousness could genuinely reside between physical incarnations. In traditional religious texts, this corresponds to the Buddhist bardo, the Christian purgatory, or in the Cayce readings, the borderland or inter-between, and perhaps even planetary sojourns. Carr is not saying these are the same thing. He is saying that his hyperspatial model provides the kind of physical framework within which survival space becomes a coherent concept, rather than merely a theological assertion. Let us be precise about what is and is not being claimed here. I am not claiming that Carr's model proves the Cayce readings. Science does not work that way, and philosophical honesty requires that distinction. The claim is more modest and more interesting. The readings' assertions about multidimensional consciousness, the borderland, and the soul's flight between planetary realms are philosophically coherent within a framework that a serious physicist has independently proposed on different grounds. The readings anticipated the shape of the problem, and modern physics is beginning to suggest that the shape is real. This matters because the most common objection to the readings' cosmology is simply that there is nowhere for a soul to go. Carr's work dissolves that objection, not by proving the readings, but by removing the assumption that higher dimensional consciousness space is physically impossible. One other detail from the readings is worth noting in this context. At about the time of physical birth on Earth, the soul entity takes its flight from another planetary sphere, often described in the readings as the planet from which the soul most recently sojourned. The connection to astrology is explicit in the readings. The strongest astrological influence on an individual is the planet from which they have most recently returned. If planetary sojourns occur in extra-dimensional space that is physically real but not accessible to ordinary three-dimensional observation, this becomes not an occult proposition, but a physics one. We are not at the point where any of this can be tested in a laboratory, but we are at the point where a serious physicist has proposed a framework in which the Cayce readings' description of life between lives is no longer simply incredible. The readings insist that the borderland is real. The soul's flight is real. The question is what kind of space these things occur in, and the answer may be a space with more dimensions than we ordinarily experience, one that physics is just beginning to take seriously. The readings suggest that each soul's most recent planetary sojourn leaves the strongest imprint on the personality of the current life. What qualities feel most deeply rooted in you? The ones that feel like they arrived with you but not necessarily ones that you learned? If so, that may be an important clue to the self-knowledge that Edgar Cayce provided in the life readings.